I want you to think back to October last year. The jacaranda flowers on campus have started falling, and just like so many other students, I know that I've got to pick up my game if I'm going to scrape that pass in second year statistics. Fast forward to this year, and I, that same undergraduate psychology student, find myself sitting next to the Prince of Cambodia at an intimate dinner in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Admittedly, if I hadn't have taken an idea and actioned it into a social movement, I wouldn't have been sitting next to the Prince of Cambodia. In my opinion, social movements are one of the most intriguing phenomena of civilization. Think hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Not in My Name, hashtag I Will Ride With You. And what's so interesting about movements like the hashtag I Will Ride With You campaign is that they bring people together and they form this collective identity. And what you've got is you've got people who would never otherwise cross paths, willing to ride with each other on the trains in Sydney. So how did I, that same undergraduate psychology student, just scraping a pass, like so many people before me, find myself starting a social movement? What I want to share with you today are 3 key tools that you can use to start a social movement. The first being a team. You need a team. Now, it's going to be deciding whether you need that ride or die buddy. You know the person I'm talking about in your friends, the person who'll do the Macca's run at 3 a.m. We've all got one. Or maybe you want to engage an intimate team, the people who will follow your idea. Now, my movement, it needed a team across the Asia-Pacific region. And I was able to do that because in my position as an appointed associate of a UNESCO chair, I had that access. But earlier this year, my own movement, we almost missed out on a now star team member. We were having this networking night at university. And this person, let's call him Tim. Tim came from a distant university. Now, my team was so focused on being able to attract the easily accessible people that they'd written Tim off. Tim didn't appeal to them because he went to a distant university and they couldn't envisage him traveling regularly to engage with our movement offline. But Tim interested me because he'd done it once already. He'd taken time out of his Thursday night, he'd gotten dressed, he'd worked out the travel logistics, he'd come to our university and he'd engaged. And so what did I do? I stalked him on social media. And what his social media revealed to me is that not only was Tim from a different community, but he had a technical skill that my movement desperately needed. He was tech savvy. So, not revealing to Tim that I'd stalked as far back as his 2011 vacation photos, I invite him out for dinner. And after that dinner, Tim joins our team. Which brings me to point 2. You need access to different networks. Now, I'm not saying that you need access to people in different countries if you're focusing on your own community. But with the rise of social media technology, we're now able to talk to people who we'd never envisaged talking with before. So me knowing that Tim was from a different community than my own, that allowed me to make that judgment. I knew that if I engaged Tim in my movement would suddenly have access to his community. And this brings me to point number 3. You need low-cost participation. And this comes into collectivism, this idea that we'll like a page, we'll share a post to support something. You need to make engaging in your movement fun and easy. So, what does starting a movement through social media look like? Does it mean getting people to share a post? Does it mean getting them to join a group? Does it mean getting them to retweet? Well, what I've done is I've simulated starting a global movement because, let's be real, an Asia-Pacific movement wasn't enough for me. What I've done is, over a 1-week period, we've started a global youth network from Brisbane, Australia. And I've addressed these 3 tools. Number 1, I have a team. I'm aiming across the world. My 2 team members I've met through friends. One comes from Manila and one comes from New York City. And this brings me to point number 2. I have access to different networks. I knew that in my position as an appointed associate of a UNESCO chair and these 2 team members, that we were able to engage with other young people in multiple countries across the world. 3, we kept participation low cost. So how do people engage in our movement? Remember, we were starting a global youth network because the movement behind that network was intended to mobilize young people interested in connecting and getting them to take their initiatives offline. So we created a link that was attached to a Facebook page where they could become a member. In observing the analytics, a few interesting things happen. So on day 1, I share my post. I make it public on Facebook. And as you can see, by day 3, we've reached 10 countries across the world in this one post. But a couple of interesting things happen. On day 3, my team member from Manila, he shares the post as well. So our access to young people in Southeast Asia considerably increases. But something interesting happens on day 3. We've got a Tim. Tim comes from Tanzania. And what I find out about this Tim is that they start randomly adding in these people that we haven't even seen before. We don't know who they're adding in. They're not known to our networks. And so this excites us. And I want to encourage this. I want to let Tanzanian Tim know that this is good. I want them to know that I've acknowledged this. And so I reach out to them and I say, hey, thanks for joining our network. And thanks for encouraging others to join as well. And by observing the analytics, what we find is that Tanzanian Tim continues to add in more participants. Jump to the next day, and my team member in New York City reshares my post to his network. And what you can see is that just after 4 days, we've got the start of a global youth network. We've got the start of a social movement. Jump to the next day, day 5. And we couldn't have anticipated this, but we find a second Tim. Tim comes from India this time. But Indian Tim differs because Indian Tim starts adding in people that we already know. The people that Indian Tim were adding in, my team, we already knew who they were. So what Indian Tim was doing was he was catalyzing those fence sitters, those people who didn't want to join the network. Because remember, they had already been exposed to our idea up to 3 times already, and they hadn't joined. So what Indian Tim was doing was simply pushing them. But we're at this stage of collectivism, and we want to get beyond that. Earlier this year, I flew to Manila. It's not a short flight, by the way. I flew to Manila because my own movement had a Tim there, and I wanted to invest in this Tim. And I invite them out for dinner. This was relatively low cost on their behalf because I'd just flown over 10 hours to see this Tim. And so, in classic Tim fashion, they go above and beyond. Because when she comes to pick me up for dinner, it's not just Tim, but it's a bunch of her friends as well. This was a classic Tim move. Why hadn't I anticipated that a Tim would not bring a bunch of their friends? And so, we're driving through Manila in this minivan. And the opening notes to Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody start to play. Oh, Tamara, don't look, don't look, don't look. Look out the window, don't look, don't make eye contact. No, they don't exist. And there's this building tension in the van. Tamara, don't look, you don't exist, don't look. They don't need to see you, it's fine, don't, no. And I can see eyes looking at me, wondering if it's okay to sing. I don't sing, by the way. And the tension continues to build. This was one of those make or break moments. This is one of those movements that could have taken my movement offline. And I knew that I had to put my dignity and my embarrassment aside. Tomorrow, no, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Galileo, 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 Galileo! That one decision set the tone for what the relationship is today. We now have an active offline volunteer team in the Philippines for my own movement. So when you have these ideas for social movements, you need these 3 key tools. You need a team that can address the skills that you need. 2, you need access to these diverse communities. Now, I'm not saying that you need to start a global youth network, but that might be as simple as not having Friday Arvo drinks at the Red Room, but going to QUT. And 3, you need to make participation simple, and you need to make it fun. So what's the point of knowing how to start a social movement through social media? While my own social movement has taken me from that dreaded second-year statistics course and into private dinners with dignitaries, social movements are important because they allow groups of people to #create change. So why do you need to know how to start a social movement? #climate change, #Brexit, #Trump. Thank you.